One of the things that stands out to me is the pillars. If you look at every temple, this is the Parthenon, sitting on the Acropolis. Every temple had pillars. In fact, a lot of the buildings were built with pillars. Now, we've had 2,500 years pass, maybe more, since all of this was happening, and the pillars are still here. A lot has collapsed, but the pillars are still here. Now, if you remember yesterday, I talked to you about the idea of when Paul refers, Galatians 2, I think it was, Paul refers to Peter, James, and John as the pillars of the church. Growing up, I just remember so many people from my childhood that were pillars of the church. You had what became known as the trio, the Peyton boys. Now, they weren't boys, they were way older than me, but that's what they were always called. And there was James, who was Dooney, there was Isaac, and there was Harold, Peyton, those three. They were married and they had kids. They were pillars of the church that I grew up in. Anytime anything needed to be done, anytime there was an event, a dinner, a project at the church, the Peyton boys were there. They were just the pillars of the church. Another is Bonnie and Vernon Wallace. From the time I was just a little guy, I remember Vernon Wallace always sit right next to my dad on the platform. I don't think I ever heard him preach a sermon. Now, he led songs and he would do his hand and he would take up an offering. But he was just always there. Bonnie Wallace was always there. They were pillars of the church. Now I look at the church that I pastor, and I think about the pillars of the church that I pastored. When I came, it was a small church, but there were pillars. The Lively's, the Jenkins, the Peltons. These were people who were solid pillars of the church, who carried that church through a rough patch, but they hung in there. And then you think about other things that are going on even now, and people that in the recent past, Grace Nash, she passed a few years ago, but she was a pillar of the church. I look at our church today and we've got so many great people that are pillars. The Garcias, the Tracys. You look at these people today, and there's a bunch more. The Harrisons. Yeah, I mean, I'm listing names and I shouldn't be listening, but just bear with me, because you know I'm on the top of a very unique place, and I just think about these pillars. I want generations to come to look back at me and my family and say they were pillars. I want you to be established so that you can be known as a pillar of the church. So when the history of the church is read 50 years from now, we can celebrate you as a pillar of the church. In fact, Shannon and I just did our 30th. That's part of the reason we're on this trip, is 30 years of pastoring. And during the month of celebrating 30 years of pastoring, we talked about many of the pillars. We honored great people over the last 30 years that's walked with us, the pillars of the church. Man, I could talk about this for a while, but I just want to encourage you, find your house of faith and become a pillar